to today's edition of Search the Scriptures. We are on study number 10 in the book of 2 Samuel. And today's study covers all of chapter 15 and the first 14 verses of chapter number 16. And we're going to try to answer three different sets of questions from this passage. The first is this: how is it that Samuel stole the hearts of the men of Israel? And what do you make of David's reactions? Secondly, contrast the behavior of Absalom with that of Ittai and Hushai. And third, consider how the rebellion shows certain men in their true colors. Again, note David's reaction. Third question is speaking specifically of the first 14 verses in chapter 16. So those are the questions we're going to be looking to answer as we read 2 Samuel, chapter number 15, beginning at the first verse, all the way through the 14th verse of chapter 16. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early, and he'd stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. Whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" He would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. And Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king, asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. At the end of 4 years of this, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow that I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur, in Aram, I made this vow: if the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." And the king said to him, "Go in peace." So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. They'd been invited as guests, and they went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. And while Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor, to come from Gilo, his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. And a messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword." The king's officials answered, "Your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses." The king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. So the king set out, with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. And all his men marched past him, along with the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and all the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath marched before the king. And the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why should you come along with me? Go back and stay with King Absalom. You're a foreigner, an exile from your homeland. You came only yesterday, and today shall I make you wander about with us when I do not know where I'm even going? Go back and take your people with you. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness." But Ittai replied to the king, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, wherever my lord the king may be, whether it means life or death, there will be your servant." David said to Ittai, "Go ahead then, march on." So Ittai the Gittite marched on with all his men and the families that were with him, and the whole countryside wept aloud as all the people passed by. The king also crossed the Kidron Valley, and all the people moved on toward the wilderness. Zadok was there too, and all the Levites who were with him were carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set down the ark of God, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished leaving the city. And then the king said to Zadok, "Take the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it in his dwelling place again. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, then I'm ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him. The king also said to Zadok the priest, do you understand? Go back to the city with my blessing. Take your son Ahimaaz with you, and also Abiathar's son Jonathan, and you and Abiathar return with your 2 sons. I will wait at the fords in the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar took the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they stayed there. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he was barefoot. And all the people with him covered their heads too, and were weeping as they went up. And David had been told, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. And when David arrived at the summit where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. And David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, your majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Won't the priests Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So Hushai, David's confidant, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. Chapter 16. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. And the king asked Ziba, why have you brought these? And Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and the fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who have become exhausted in the wilderness. The king then asked, where is your servant's master's grandson? And Ziba said to him, he's staying in Jerusalem, because he thinks today the Israelites will restore to me my grandfather's kingdom. Then the king said to Ziba, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours. I humbly bow, Ziba said, and I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king. As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there, and his name was Shimei, son of Gerer. And he cursed as he came out. Then he pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops in the special guard were on David's right and left. Then he cursed Shimei, said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer. Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, what does this have to do with you, you son of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, who can ask, why do you do this? David then said to Abishai and all his officials, my son, my own flesh and blood, is trying to kill me. How much more then this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of his curse today. So David and his men continued along the road, while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite of him, cursing as he went, and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. The king and all his people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. Question number 1, how was it that Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel? And what do you make of David's reactions here? Well, Absalom really, he's acting like a rap star or an NBA star that has let a lot of things go to his head. He starts traveling around with an entourage and a fancy set of wheels throughout all the neighborhoods. He starts to act like a sugar daddy to all the people there, while at the same time indicating that the higher-ups didn't really care anything about what was going on in their lives. So once again, it appears that David knew what was going on, but he never confronted his son about it. Absalom was always pushing the envelope. Perhaps he did that in order to get his father's attention. Maybe he had some hope that at some point his father would come along and define some boundaries for him and indicate his true love for his son. Absalom never had any boundaries defined for him. So he was therefore left to define the boundaries on his own. He not only lost control of his son, but he also lost control of the hearts of all the people, or many of the people that were there in his kingdom. He knew that Absalom had the hearts of the people right where he wanted them, so he fled rather than causing a lot of countless bloodshed. The second question, contrast the behavior of Absalom with that of Ittai and Hushai. Well, Absalom had no sense of loyalty toward his father, whereas Ittai the Gittite and Hushai the Archite, though foreigners, remained loyal to King David. Maybe it was because David demonstrated his concern for them by providing some boundaries in their lives. The third question, consider how the rebellion shows certain men in their true colors. And again, note David's reaction. This is talking primarily about the men that came out to curse David, and also Ziba, Mephibosheth's servant. Well, the saying goes, as the going gets tough, the tough get going. And this is certainly true in this incident. There's nothing like drawing a line in the sand to determine which side people are on. One kind of wonders here at this point if David maybe had spoiled Mephibosheth in the same way that he spoiled Absalom. I mean, it's hard to imagine that the crippled son of Jonathan had a lot of boundaries. I imagine he had very few boundaries placed on him in his life while he was living with David and eating at the king's table. But he no doubt used that condition to its full advantage. Maybe that's what was going on. Or perhaps the opposite of that is true. There is a rest of the story to this that unfolds in 2 Samuel chapter 19. So maybe at this point we shouldn't rush to judgment concerning Mephibosheth and Ziba. We'll see in a few chapters. Hope this study's been a blessing to you today, and may God richly bless the rest of your day.